This is Bumping Into, where we have interesting conversations with people from all walks of life.
Hi everybody, welcome to Bumping Into. My name is Francis Populin, and on this episode of the show, we are going into the world of the 5G, 4G, Wi-Fi health concerns. My guest on this episode is Professor Dariusz Leszczynski. Now, Dariusz is more than anybody suitably qualified to advise on the risks around 5G and in particular all sorts of EMF fields. He's an extremely well-known research professor, was head of the Radiation Biology Laboratory at the Radiation and Nuclear Safety Authority for Finland, and has also been on the board of organisations such as the World Health Organization. He's conducted experimental work, he's released various reports. His particular focus, I guess, is around the safety guidelines of mobile phone use and 5G in particular. He's also currently focused heavily on electromagnetic hypersensitivity, in which he's released a couple of reports on. Let me just explain my original mindset for this episode. So I think we can all say that it's fair enough to have concerns, or at least questionable concerns, about 5G and mobile phone use in general. I mean, yes, we are not at a point where it's a blanket yes or no, there isn't. But anyone that's looked into it and tries to look at things balanced would say that there's enough intelligent professors that are concerned, and there's enough people that are saying there's no concern. So if we line up in the middle, then we keep the door open to possible concern, which I think is the healthiest space to be in. Now, what I wanted to achieve for this episode is I wanted to look at comparing 5G and the dangers with 5G in comparison to 433 megahertz. And the reason being is that we are seeing an explosion of 433 megahertz products in our homes and our offices. I mean, look, Wi-Fi is certainly a major part, and it gets left on in every office building and almost every home anyway. So we're being bombarded with Wi-Fi. But 433 more so because smoke detectors, any interlinking device, alarm systems tend to be using the 433 megahertz, and that's always on. And I was curious to see how that compared in a health, or I suppose, how the concerns compared for 433 to all of the other, be it 2G, 3G, 4G, 5G, and Wi-Fi networks. Is there a ranking of what is possibly worse, what is definitely bad? Unfortunately, that's not where this episode went. This episode focused more on the safety guidelines and Dariusz's, I suppose, concern with the shortfall of the current safety guidelines, and also around the electromagnetic hypersensitivity reports that he's officially released recently. So we didn't encompass everything that I was hoping, and perhaps, look, if I bump into the right person, we can revisit this and come up with a comparative study. One thing that I did, I suppose, come across that was quite interesting, and it summarised why there's a concern quite simply. When you look at other frequencies such as AM, FM, the wavelengths are extremely big. Look, don't quote me, it's AM radio, which really isn't used that much anymore, so it has a wavelength of roughly 300 meters. FM radio is much, much tighter. It's about 3.5 meter wavelengths, and that can travel very, very far. And the argument is, and forgive me if I'm wrong, this is just a very, very broad, basic summary, how someone was explaining it to me, is that when the AM and the FM wave passes through us, as it does all day long, it's a very huge, sweeping wavelength cycle. So it doesn't come into your body as a whole, cause any destruction, and leave. It's basically a very soft wavelength that's much taller and bigger than most people. So you've got AM that's at roughly 300 meters, 900 plus feet. You've got FM that's at 3.5 meters. And then what happens is you come into 433 megahertz, which is roughly about 70 centimeters. But 5G is millimeter. So we're talking millimeter wavelengths. And this is the concern, is that it's so small and it basically goes straight into your body because it's a millimeter of a wavelength. And as being so small, it's such high powered. The FM and the AMs can travel very, very far with their broad sweeping waves, but a millimeter wavelength needs an extremely high amount of power. So you're being bombarded with a very high amount of power and a very, very small wavelength. And this was the concern for it damaging your skin, damaging your organs, and causing cellular damage. It's probably far more complicated and far more extensive than that, but that was a very, very broad summary of how someone explained to me why there's such a concern and that we don't know much about millimeter wavelengths. AM and FM have been around for many, many years. Millimeter wavelengths at such high rates haven't. Therefore, there comes the concern, the safety guidelines. Are we looking deep enough? Are we checking enough before we're imposing all of this technology on the population? So Dariusz is my guest on the show. He's an interesting guy to talk to. He's extremely well experienced. I think he's extremely balanced, very common sense rich. He's been very vocal in his concerns around safety standards and about basically that they're outdated. We're using standards that are generations prior, not up to current, and we're saying everything's okay because it was okay 10, 20 years ago. So he's an advocate for more testing, for more research, for more caution, if but anything. That's really all he stands for. He has been taken under the wing of a lot of activists saying that we should stop 5G and we should stop 4G and we should do this. He says in this episode that that basically can't happen, and that's not him. And that all we do need to do is exercise more caution, be more aware, and we summarize some of those things. The other thing I am going to do is I'm going to list a couple of very interesting and important documentaries around the topic. One of those documentaries is called Something is in the Air. It is a phone radiation documentary that does also feature Professor Dariusz Leszczynski, among some others, and goes into a couple of interesting experiments that they have done. One being the beehive test, which is quite interesting if you haven't seen it and seen what actually happens when you place a mobile phone inside a beehive and turn it on. The other one is going to be a fantastic documentary that was produced a few years ago now and caused quite a lot of controversy. It was created by Dr. Marianne Damasi. Marianne is an investigative journalist and a former medical scientist. In my opinion, she is one of the best investigative journalists in Australia. She does some fantastic work. She's extremely intelligent, extremely balanced, and presents her findings and data very articulately with an abundance of common sense. At one point in time, she was working for the ABC and was the host of the Catalyst series, and this documentary that she was involved in called Wi-Fi, also featuring Dariusz Leszczynski, created quite a stir and was deemed to be too one-sided, I guess you could say. It was part of a series of episodes that did cause a lot of grief at the time, but this was a fascinating documentary because it spoke to brain surgeons, it spoke to researchers, it spoke to a lot of people, and they each describe their concerns and their findings. I am going to list both of these on the website page for this episode. So if you want to go deeper, then these are going to be the two episodes, the two links that you should check out and watch because they are extremely interesting, especially around Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and of course 4 and 5G. Now this episode that we've got here on the show is not just for scratching the surface. It's a long episode. There's a lot of information. This is for someone that wants to go deep and hears, I suppose, the scientists' concerns and findings in detail. Personally, what I like to do is I listen to most of my podcasts at 1.25 speed. I find that helps you get through the content reasonably quick. And, if you want, you can go back and listen to it again. It's entirely up to yourself. It is a long episode, but there's a lot of important information in there to take in. I do encourage you to head to the website, check out the two links I am going to post because it will help you form an overall encompassing opinion of the topic. I'm going to be pushing a bit harder and speaking to a few other people to see if I can get some more information, particularly around the Bluetooth side of things, with everyone using the little earbuds that go into your ears. How much radiation is that throwing out, and are we seeing any sort of ear issues that are popping up? So this won't be the end of that topic. I hope you enjoy it. stick with it. It's a great episode. I'll see you on the other side. All right, Dariusz. Well, I'm in your hands. So you take me through some of your research and your findings and your concerns around I suppose particularly that's the 5G technology that is at the forefront of what you're concerned about, isn't it?
Yes. Well, I've been doing research for many years. It started in 90s concerning effects of radio frequency on biology and physiology of animals, cells, and humans. And our own research was mainly, or started with, examining in vitro effects of radio frequency mobile phone radiation in particular on human endothelial cells grown in culture in laboratory. And we found several effects. One thing was that this radiation was activating stress response of the cells, which stress response of cells means that cells are recognizing this factor, this radiation, as something what brings disturbance to normal physiology, and they are trying to prevent this disturbance by launching stress response. And it is very, very common response among cells in humans, animals, or just single cells organisms, how they defend themselves against some factors that could affect their physiology, normal physiology. And also, of course, following this, we looked at some changes in those cells. We looked at expression of genes and expression of proteins using high throughput screening techniques, looking at thousands of genes and thousands of proteins. And we found out that exposure of cells, human cells in vitro, in laboratory, led to changes in expression of numerous genes. And this was followed by changes in expression of numerous proteins. And also we observed changes not only in expression of proteins, but also in activity of proteins, as it was measured by chemical changes in phosphorylation of proteins, which regulates activity of the protein. So what it means, we get those changes in vitro, in cells that we grow in laboratory. These are very artificial conditions, and there may happen things in cells that normally will not happen when the cell is inside the human body. So that was the beginning. We started with looking at what is happening in endothelial cells, human cell line. So that was cell line which was derived from humans, but it was transformed in this way that it was proliferating all the time, limitlessly. So it was a little bit modified, not primary human cells, just isolated from human body, but cells that were continuously growing in laboratory. But then we thought that since we see those changes in cells, next step is to check this in humans, whether similar changes can happen in humans when we expose human to mobile phone radiation. And then we got funding for pilot study where we exposed human volunteers. I think remember it was 10 people. We exposed their skin to mobile phone radiation, small area on skin, to very well-known dose of cell phone radiation. And we extracted from this skin cells. So we took a biopsy of skin, extracted from the cells and proteins, and then analyzed, comparing exposed skin to non-exposed skin. And we found changes in numerous protein expression in exposed versus non-exposed skin. So meaning even 1 hour exposure of human skin to mobile phone radiation at levels that are permitted by safety limits led to some changes in expression of proteins, numerous proteins. Our attempts to identify what proteins they were due to limited amount of samples were unsuccessful. So we don't know what proteins they were exactly that responded to this radiation. But fact was that numerous proteins behaved differently when they were isolated from cells that were exposed to cell phone radiation. And it means that this kind of short-term exposure of human cells inside human body to mobile phone radiation can induce biological changes, that different proteins are behaving differently. However, this is not to say that those biological changes are health effects. This we don't know, because there is very big difference between biological changes and health effects. Biological changes may happen, different proteins expression can come up, go down, same things with genes may come up or down, but as long as those changes are happening inside our cells, but they don't lead to changes in the normal physiology of tissues or organs, we cannot talk about health effects. And even if some changes happen to normal physiological changes, functions of our cells or organs, it doesn't yet mean that it will lead to health effects. Those changes need to be persistent. They need to be sort of large magnitude, that really they can shake inadvertently this normal physiology, and then over time it may require quite a long time before they can lead to any health changes. Therefore, when people are talking very often, well, we exposed cells or animals to some mobile phone radiation, some doses, and we observed some changes in expression of some genes or proteins, or activation of stress response, or activation of oxidative stress. It doesn't yet mean that it will lead to any health effects. To find that it is leading to health effects, it requires time. You need to follow it for a long time, that really this will end up with health effects. I could say it by comparison. I could mention this kind of thing, that when you have a cell phone, and at least earlier it was, when call was coming to your cell phone and you were watching, for example, TV, then very often you heard this kind of buzz in your TV, and then it was coming phone call. So I could say that this buzz was this biological response of your TV, because there was coming radiation. This TV screen or TV recognized it as something what is disturbing. There came this buzz, but what happened? You go to your phone call, TV was working just fine, no problem. So meaning that this biological effect, this buzz in your TV screen, didn't automatically translate into some health effect to break your TV screen. No, it was working. So, and this kind of biological effect could be coming during watching TV. You could receive numerous calls. Nothing would happen to your TV as such, except for this, that you would hear every time this buzz would be disturbing. So this is what one could understand as difference between biological effect and health effect. Those were sort of effects that electronics of your TV recognized this radiation, but it passed, nothing happened to your TV screen, and your TV was working further without any problems. And people are often messing up with this, that they say, okay, so there are those biological effects, so they will be followed by health effects, not necessarily. There is also another thing that it is known that extended stress response, which is induced in cells, or oxidative stress, or changes in expression of different known proteins may lead to certain health effects in other situations. And this doesn't automatically mean that similar stress response or oxidative stress or change in this or that protein, which will be eventually sometime induced by exposure to mobile phone radiation, will end up in the same kind of health effect as other factors that can induce the same biological change. So people often say, okay, if stress response, oxidative stress, can potentiate possibility of getting cancer, of developing cancer, then it means that if cell phone radiation induces oxidative stress, then it potentiates, it might, but not necessarily. It doesn't have to. We need to show it. And what is our problem? And major problem that we wanted to address, but our funding was cut. Namely, first we do experiments on cells in vitro, in laboratory, as we have done. And then when we have a knowledge that, okay, exposures can change different aspects of physiology of cells, then we take this and go to humans, and as far as it is ethically permitted, with all permits and so on, we make experiment in humans and try to see whether this, what we observe in vitro in laboratory, whether this is happening in human being. Because in vitro, the cell is lonely cell sitting there in laboratory dish, and it is in artificial culture medium. It is, many things may happen to it.
Yeah.
But it may, it may respond to this radiation. But cell, which is inside our body, it is in the normal environment, and it is stimulated continuously by enormous number of different stimuli coming from other cells, coming from blood circulation, coming from lymphatic circulations. You name it, they get the stimuli throughout the day and night. And if this cell inside the human body can respond and recognize so weak stimulus as this radiation that meets safety limits, that it means that there is possibility for effects, both biological and health. But this is the possibility. This possibility is necessary to prove. And this is not proven because although we have evidence in vitro, there are such responses like oxidative stress, regular stress response, that DNA damage, and so on and so forth. We don't have this evidence shown in living humans. If we can show DNA damage in cells in vitro, that it rings a bell. Then we go to animals, or simultaneously it was shown in mice that it can be caused in mice or rats, DNA damage by this exposure. Why still, until now, until this day, we don't have such evidence for humans? It is not ethically forbidden to expose humans to mobile phone radiation. We do it every day continuously, numerous times a day. We expose ourselves. Take a sample. There are many kinds of samples that is possible to take from humans very ethically, and analyze them and look for DNA damage, whether it is happening to humans. But no, we have this speculation all the time that in vitro, in cells, we have shown DNA damage. Wow. In animals, in rats or mice, we have shown DNA damage. Wow. And then there is this leap of faith. So it might be also happening in humans. Why so far it has not been shown? And so on and so forth. Many of those effects that we observe in vitro, in Petri dish, or in animal studies, they should be repeated in any possible, ethically possible way in humans, and then we can speculate what kind of impact it may have on health effects. So, because often it goes a little bit backwards, that often we have disease, then we start to dissect what this disease in human is inducing, causing, where from it is, how it is happening, and then we start from human, go to cells, and in cells we make experiments to try to find out what is happening in this disease. Whereas here we don't do it differently. We first do this with cells and then try to say that, well, maybe the same thing is happening in humans without showing that it is happening in humans. So this is our problem right now, that we have lots of evidence indicating that there are biological effects, that they are happening at levels that are permitted by the current safety guidelines, safety limits, but we don't show it in humans, that they are really happening in humans. So then it's a question, is there some artifact that we see those changes just in vitro cultured cells, very artificial, or in some animal models that then we have problems to translate it because mouse is not human, because rat is not human. So we have all the time those doubts that whether it is possible to translate into human health or not. But at the same time, we don't do those experiments to prove that this same effect is happening in humans, or prove that there is not happening in humans. But of course,
interesting, because you would assume, a lot of people would assume that the people writing the standards and doing the testing, that it would be done at that high level. You sort of take for granted, you think that there is someone already doing this at a top tier level.
Well, I must say that if people who are using cell phones, and if many scientists who are not doing this research but reading about this research in the mainstream media, and then wondering what nonsense people are talking about, if they would know how poor quality and limited science we have to be the basis for our saying that safety limits protect people, they would be amazed and shocked.
Wow.
Because whenever you read some reviewing evidence on some effects of mobile phone radiation on some properties of cells or mice or whatever biological experiments, whenever it is being reviewed, there is always the conclusion, but we have a limited knowledge because we have lots of gaps in knowledge. So we have studied this and this and this, but there is still plenty of topics what we didn't study and would be useful. And there is always one thing that those reviews often end up. But even this evidence, what we have published, is of poor quality. So meaning this, we have this situation when we have thousands and thousands of studies. Yes, we have thousands and thousands of studies, but most of them is of poor quality because either there is radiation exposure, not very good quality, or there is this experimental part, this biological or biomedical experimental part, not of sufficiently good quality, or there is statistical analysis not of very good quality. So we have all these problems that make that this scientific evidence is of relatively poor quality, but on this bulk of poor quality science, some people give assurance that everything is fine, that there is no problem, because poor quality science assures us that we are fine.
And it's voluminous. There's plenty of it.
There is plenty of people who are assuring that we are safe, there is no any health problem because we have scientific evidence, but we don't have enough. Believe me, for many years, since I've been for a long time involved in these issues, for many years there was talk about this, whether children are differently affected than adults by mobile phones. Yeah. And that was in late 90s, early 2000. There was talk, very often mentioned just sort of in passing. There is no evidence that adults are affected, their health is affected, and there is also no evidence that children would be differently affected than adults. Just there were no studies on children. So meaning it was said, we don't have evidence that children would be differently affected, but there was not mentioned in next sentence, but we don't have studies on children. Until finally, now we have some studies, for better or for worse. Some people say that they are not of very good quality. So this is the problem, that often we say that something, but we don't have evidence indicating that this or that will be harmful. But there should be next question. What is the evidence that we have? Do we have enough of this evidence? And then we count, earlier it was about children, now it is also about 5G. Yeah. If we look at those reviews about 5G, and especially this, what will be new coming, or what is new coming with 5G, these millimeter waves, then we are also being assured that everything is fine, that there will be no any problem, 5G is fine and will not harm humans. But when reading several reviews concerning this, what we know about 5G millimeter waves effects on cells, animals, and humans, we know very, very little. And this is not only this, what I have written review about effects on human skin, but also other reviews from other scientists were indicating exactly the same, namely, we don't have evidence to back up this information that we know what these millimeter waves will do or won't do. And even this evidence, what we already have, is of limited quality, if not poor quality. So we have again the same thing, the same story repeats, that we are saying that everything is fine, or some people are saying everything is fine, there will be no problem when introducing updated and with new wavelength technology. But at the same time, we don't really have this science to back it up. It is sort of assumption and sort of wishful thinking that there will not be any serious problems.
Is there been any, I suppose, indication that someone's looking at things like brain cancers and seeing the rate keep continually climbing? Obviously no one's going to join the dots, but if you take brain cancers and say, well, since 97 to current, we've seen this incredible increase as mobile phone use increases and mobile phone power increases. Is there any overlay that's occurring?
No, and that's the sort of problem, and I would say problem. Namely, when mobile phones were introduced and very rapidly they took off in population, that nowadays nearly everybody has mobile phone. then it was said that, all right, if it is causing brain cancer, then everybody will get it, will be pandemic of brain cancer all over the world, or epidemic.
Yeah.
Anyway, everybody will get it, and this skyrocketing number of cell phones will align with skyrocketing number of brain cancers. But this is not happening. It didn't happen. Then, of course, there was talk about this, that brain cancer is disease that requires many years to develop. So there is a long period of latency. So there was talk about 10, 20, 30 years of latency for brain cancer to develop, even if it is in some way triggered by cell phone radiation. But still, it is not so much materialized. Then is problem of whether mobile phone radiation is this factor that is triggering and causing development of brain cancer, or whether it is only assisting some other factors that are causing brain cancer to propagate into cancerous tissue faster. But there is also this sort of issue. What I'm talking about is this individual sensitivity. Namely, for every factor that we are as humans exposed to, there is always some subpopulation of people who are more sensitive than others. And it is for everything, including radiation like ionizing radiation or ultraviolet radiation. These are also radiations, parts of electromagnetic spectrum. So for those radiations, we have more and less sensitive people. So why we would think that electromagnetic spectrum of this radio frequency, this what we are using for wireless communication, will be different, will be an exception among these other forms of radiation, or would be exception among all other factors that are affecting our physiology, our bodies, coming from our environment. Why it would be? So it is logical to say and to think that also this mobile phone radiation, this radio frequency electromagnetic fields, they also have some subpopulation of people who are more sensitive to this radiation. And I don't mean only those who are complaining about electromagnetic hypersensitivity, but I mean in general that this radiation may affect different people differently in such a way that some people may get some symptoms like those who are getting or are claiming to be EHS people, electromagnetic hypersensitive people, when they are getting some headaches, some skin problems, some heart problems, and so on and so forth. This kind of large variety of very non-specific symptoms that are caused by, but can be caused by very many influences. Yep. But also, I mean this, that some people might be more sensitive in such a way that some of them may develop over time brain cancer, some not. And now everything depends on this. What is property of the person who is sensitive to this radiation in a way that will lead to develop brain cancer? So meaning, what is this change that is induced in this person, and what is in this person the normal physiology prone to this factor in such a way that it will lead to development of brain cancer. So meaning this way that are not sensitive to this radiation. Most of us will not be sensitive in a way to develop brain cancer or any other health problem, but some of us might. And now it might be this, that not every user will get brain cancer from using cell phone, but only some of us who have some specific properties, what we don't know yet anything about, that are more sensitive. And then we have this answer why we don't see this kind of epidemic of brain cancer, even though brain cancer goes this usage of mobile phones increased in society very exponentially, dramatically. But we have to say that there are few epidemiological studies indicating that if a person is using for long periods of time mobile phone, that over time it may lead to increased risk of developing brain cancer. And this average use of cell phone, it is more or less specified this way, that it is if person is using mobile phone for half an hour per day or longer, every day for 10 years or longer, then its risk of developing brain cancer increases by 100 to 170%. Yeah. So there are those few studies indicating this kind of change. There are also studies like this, what you mentioned, that we have not really increase in brain cancer in general in society. Even though there is steep increase in usage of cell phones, this increase in brain cancer overall in society is more or less plateau.
Oh, okay.
Of course, there are subpopulations of those people, meaning subpopulation if we take different age brackets. So meaning who and when started to use phone and how much this person is using a cell phone, there might be some differences. So meaning that, for example, people that are somewhere around 40 years of age who are using much more those phones and who earlier started to use them than those people who are in their 70s or 80s, then those people might have little more of this brain cancer risk in this population developing. But overall, it is not really, as when we unify whole society and everybody, doesn't matter age, put online, then it's not really increasing. But once we start dissecting what is not very much done so far, then there might be some variations depending on age or how much people were using, or maybe there can be also difference in health status besides brain cancer, but also other problems, health-related problems in those people, and how this cell phone radiation might be affecting them. But we can, of course, say this kind of thing, that when we have these few epidemiological studies indicating that avid users may have increased risk of developing brain cancer, how those studies were done? Those studies were done in normal population of people who are using regular cell phones, meaning they didn't get any experimental cell phones, but they had their cell phones, they went to shop and purchased their phone. What it means, they purchased phones that are in compliance with current safety limits, meaning according to ICNIRP and safety guidelines, and according to WHO, and according to FCC, and according to American ICS, those phones meet all safety guidelines, safety limits, they should be harmless. But those studies showing that avid usage of cell phone for 10 years or longer may lead to increased risk of developing brain cancer, what indicates that those safety guidelines, safety limits are insufficient to protect people, because if they use avidly the cell phone for a long period of time, even though this cell phone as such is complying with current safety limits and safety guidelines, they have a problem of increased risk of developing brain cancer. It is clear human evidence showing that current safety limits and safety guidelines might be or are insufficient to protect everyone. Of course, we don't exactly know who and why is got this brain cancer, and this is not enough, maybe well dissected who are those people and why some of us are getting brain cancer that might be associated with usage of cell phones and some not. This should be studied a little more. But this is this human evidence showing that we can claim that safety guidelines should be updated and modified down, because these current safety guidelines are insufficient to protect people.
Well, that's a known. I think that's a common complaint, isn't it? That the standards were set some time ago, and mobile phone usage has increased rapidly. I mean, if you look at the holding the phone, storing the phone, talking on the phone, doing everything on it, your exposure now compared to what it was pre-smartphone would be astronomically different. So you would hope that the industry standards have looked at that and adapted, rather than saying, oh, we looked 20 years ago and it was okay then, we'll keep pushing that same song.
I would be a little bit cautious to say that our exposure as individuals has increased astronomically, because one should remember that every new technology, 2G, 3G, 4G, 5G, is emitting less radiation in order to function. And point is that the industry makes phones more and more efficient in order to make battery life more efficient, and in order to make this, that base stations need less energy to emit, less power to emit, in order to facilitate communication between phone and base station. So meaning that those technologies are being made more and more energy and radiation efficient in order to make them better. Therefore, not necessarily we are exposed to much, much higher doses of this radiation with these newer technologies. But it doesn't mean that everything is fine, because right now this pretty common opinion is, when you read newspapers or listen to some scientists, that everything is fine. This new gadget on market, or new phone or new device, is everything fine because it meets safety guidelines. It emits well below safety limits. So this is considered as free ride. You can put on market any device. You can install at your home any device when it is sold in such a way that it confirms, when it is sold, it confirms with current safety guidelines. But point is, are those safety guidelines sufficient? Are they good enough to protect humans from potential health effects? And fact that there is no epidemic of health problems caused by this radiation is not proof that it is safe and healthy, but is rather this lack of knowledge how different individuals may respond to this radiation compared to others. So we are all the time analyzing everything in bulk. We take all people together, we average them and say, well, on average, there is nothing happening.
Yeah.
But we don't look at those different smaller segments. Is there something happening here or here? And this is this problem. And this is problem also with epidemiological studies, which on one hand, they provide evidence of increased risk of developing cancer. But at the same time, they are of poor quality. This is also evidence of poor quality because they are not having exposure information. Namely, they don't have this information to how much of radiation person was exposed. They have information by using surrogates of radiation exposure. And those surrogates can be different, whether person has been using cell phone or whether person has been using cell phone for how long period of time, what person remembers how much person has been using cell phone, or for how long time person had agreement with cell phone provider to use cell phone. So those are all surrogates, and they are leading to this, that people with very different exposures can be analyzed in the same exposed group. So we say that those people are highly exposed because they used cell phone for 10 years. So we say that this is highly exposed group. They used for 10 years and they had for 10 years agreement with cell phone providers. So this is highly exposed. And some other group is less because they were using for shorter period of time. But also within this group, there are people who are using more or less cell phone. But what it also doesn't take into consideration that we are living in different places with a different reach of networks. So meaning some people are living in close proximity to base station, yeah, and they have good reception. Some people live very far from base station. They have reception, but much weaker. And when they have weaker reception, their phone emits more radiation. Whereas when they are close to base station, phone needs much less radiation to be emitted to get in touch with base station. Yeah. So it means that person who is using continuous cell phone in good reception area will be much less exposed to radiation from cell phone than person who lives far away from cell tower because his cell phone will be emitting much more radiation. But those two persons, when they use cell phone for the same period of time, are being analyzed in the same exposed group, even though in practice they were exposed to very different dose of radiation. But then they are being in the same exposed group and everything is being averaged, and therefore it makes, we don't know how much, underestimation of possible risk of developing cancer. So even those studies, those few studies, maybe 4, showing, indicating that there is increased risk of developing brain cancer by 100 or 170%. One study says 40%. So let's say 40, 100, 170% increased in risk of developing brain cancer. Those numbers are all underestimates because we don't know exactly how much radiation different people were exposed to. Therefore, we are sort of averaging this radiation exposure, which leads to underestimation of brain cancer risk. So this brain cancer risk, what is reported 40 or 100 or 170% increase might be underestimate, but we don't know what it would be in reality, because we don't have radiation exposure information.
And is there anything from an end user point of view, it's very hard to limit your exposure. You're surrounded by Wi-Fi, you're surrounded by, people use Bluetooth, they've got a phone in their pocket, they're always on their phones, everything's wireless. So your exposure it's very hard to limit. So is there any health measures that you can take that protect at a cellular level the damage that can be done that you're aware of?
Well, of course, it is possible in such a way that, especially when base stations, where those big base stations every now and then seen on the horizon. So this radiation, which was coming from those base stations, is very, very low. And even in experimental conditions in laboratory, it is difficult to show biological effects induced by so low radiation. Therefore, the vast majority of radiation, what we are exposed to, is coming from our own cell phone. So meaning the more we talk on cell phone, the more our brain is exposed to cell phone, unless we use speakerphone or we use earpiece. But then there is another issue that when we keep our cell phone in pocket, when we are talking on it, then our brain will be not exposed to this radiation, but traces tissues where our pocket is located. This what is also not spoken about, that before, when we had this not smartphones, they were emitting radiation. Then when we were talking on them, then they were emitting bulk of radiation. Whereas when we were not talking, we were keeping them on our belt or in pocket, they were emitting very seldom, very little radiation every now and then some quick buzz to communicate with base station and inform, I'm here. Right. So in case somebody was calling, that network knew where this particular phone was located and could connect phone call. So meaning this exposure to tissues surrounding our pocket where we stored cell phone was minuscule, if any. Whereas now when we are changing to, or we have changed to smartphones, situation has changed, because they are emitting radiation not only then when we are talking, but also when we are connected to internet. So meaning that when we put this phone in some pocket, either front pocket of our trousers or our breast pocket, then those tissues that are next to this phone are being much more exposed to this radiation than when we had those old-fashioned phones which were not connected to internet. But once they are smart, connected to internet, they emit much more radiation. About this is not very much spoken, that when you have smartphone and you like to avoid being much exposed to radiation, then of course, one thing, limit usage of this cell phone. Not always it is possible. Another advice is limit talking in such a way that you keep your phone to your head, but rather use either earpiece or speakerphone. Very many people do so. I'm frequently surprised to see on street how many people really do it in this way. So this is another way to limit exposure. But there is not much talk about this. Don't keep your cell in your pocket when you are connected to internet. Because some people say, no, yes, I need all this information. But no, when you are walking through the park and you are walking and going through cities and so on, your phone is sitting in pocket for an hour or a couple of hours before you need to look something. Why this phone is then connected to internet with data connection? So meaning disconnect your data for that time And then when you stop in park and you suddenly have urge to check your emails, click on data connection, bam, your emails are updated, everything is there. So meaning, instead of this, that this phone was sitting in your pocket for this 1 hour and collecting all this information, those updates, and giving you this radiation exposure wherever your pocket was, this phone was idling there in your pocket. And when you sat down, you keep it in your hand, it is away from your body, you connect, it connects you and updates all this information, and this all radiation goes somewhere else. Yeah. So this is good advice for people that don't keep data on then when you don't need it.
Yeah,
so meaning when there are extended periods of time when you cannot use or when you will not look on your phone, and then disconnect data, and then when you need it, connect data, and everything is coming instant. So these are those ways to limit exposure.
Yeah. No, that's a great idea. Well, thank you very much for your time and all your information. Is there anything else that you wanted to add?
This calls for banning this technology feel a little bit utopian. It's not going to happen. It will not happen. This, as some people say, this train has left station a long time ago. So there is no return. There is only this, that we should think how to limit unnecessary exposures. And everybody should think about it. Do I need to expose myself so much? And use those few possible options. And remember that the source of vast majority of our exposure is our cell phone. It's not this base station. Way to limit this is to use speakerphone and to disconnect from internet when it is not necessary. Idling, sitting.
Or a plugged-in earpiece rather than having a Bluetooth one with more radiation. Plug in.
No, this is also something what I'm not certain about. Meaning this earpiece, it is also very minuscule radiation. This is a good question whether it can really cause some problem or not. People say, oh, maybe it is affecting hearing. Well, or hearing nerve, because this was also indicated in some studies that eventually this nerve, hearing nerve, might be affected by cell phone radiation. But let's remember, this hearing nerve might be very much affected by how loudly we listen to music. Same thing is about, well, if you are studying children who are using very much Wi-Fi, then their learning ability is getting lower and lower. Question is it radiation, or is it hanging on internet on this Wi-Fi and this causing that their learning ability is lesser and lesser? So is it caused by radiation, or is it psychological effect of hanging on internet and looking at those different videos, messages, and so on, instead of doing real research? And recently also in Finland, there is research showing that digital media is not good for learning, that students much better absorb knowledge when they have a book in front of them and go through the book instead of looking at their screen in school. A part of this, that of course, then very often teachers are complaining that they don't have control what those students are really doing on their screens when teacher is talking, and they should be doing something, what else they are doing there. So this is another thing. But there is already accumulating knowledge that when you are reading information on screen only, that your memorizing of this information and absorbing, learning it, is worse than when you take a piece of paper and read it and focus on this and learn this way much, much better. Question is it radiation, or are there other factors that are affecting their ability to study that are radiation independent? Or is there both? I don't know, but sort of blaming automatically radiation because this is Wi-Fi or this is cell phone where what you are using for your studies, because you are in school and in classroom is Wi-Fi and this is blamed for poor learning. It is not so automatic. And it is, at this time, it is rather this way that, as I'm saying, when we don't know for sure, let's avoid Wi-Fi at school, not because I know that it is harmful, but because there is possible to have a plug-in computers and get the same knowledge even faster. Connections to internet than from Wi-Fi that sometimes doesn't work, doesn't know. So, but it is this, what I say, precautionary measure. Don't use Wi-Fi in school unnecessarily when you can connect your computers to internet via wire, and this way have better internet and less exposure to radiation in situation when you don't know for sure and you like to be precautionary.
Yeah, no, that's common sense. That's perfect information. Yeah, I agree. Do you think, what time frame do you put on us being in a far more advanced position to know with certainty these effects of Wi-Fi or 5G or radiation in general? Is it another 10 years that you would hope would be a game changer in that space, or is this just going to keep pushing along?
Most likely it will be keeping pushing along because the technology develops very fast, whereas our biomedical research is very slow.
Right.
It's very slow, not only because of lack of funding, I tell about this in a moment, but also because it takes time to make experiment. If you like to make experiment, you make animal study that lasts many months, and when you analyze this data and so on and so forth, and before you publish it, it can take a couple of years when you design experiment and finally it is being published. Or, for example, in epidemiological studies, you wait for 10 or 20 years when you are gathering information and finally you get it collected, analyzed, and published. So it can take very long time. Another thing is, of course, that this exposure scenario is changing very much all the time. So first we had the regular phones, which were emitting quite a lot of radiation, but we kept them only to our head when we were talking, and we exposed only our head. Then came smartphones when we expose other parts of our body. Time will show whether it has any significance or not. Then there will be coming more newer technologies when we are having now 5G millimeter waves, which are being absorbed only by the skin, but it doesn't mean that they are harmless because they are absorbed by the skin, because even there is evidence that we can affect our skin only and get effects into our physiology of brain. So it means that this is everything connected. This, that we change something in our skin, it doesn't mean that it stays in skin. It goes all over body. Mediators can go to other organs, including brain, and can affect there. So we can affect our brain by affecting skin only.
Wow.
And then, of course, there are other frequencies which have still much more power to transport information, then millimeter waves, terahertz, and so on. So this technology is changing all the time. We are getting more and more different gadgets that will be on us or implanted in us. This is the future of everything, if you ask Elon Musk and so on. So then you have your somewhere chip implanted in you, connected to your brain, and you are genius and so on. And so meaning there is also a problem with this, not only with radiation, but mainly problem with behavioral psychology, how we as people are reacting and can cope with all this huge amount of information and changes in behavior caused by using these new technologies, which are everywhere and which are forcing us to change ways of our lives, very modifying them extremely much from this, what we were born to
radically
do.
different.
So meaning how we were born to be functioning in environment or in society. This is being extremely much modified, and I would think that even more than radiation, the psychological impact of anti-social media is much worse. Addiction to mobile devices, addiction to internet, addiction to all different applications, fact that they are being developed in order to make you addict to them. Those algorithms are developed in order to sort of make you like, to please you like endorphins.
They keep stimulating and keep stimulating.
Keep stimulating you. You get likes, you get this, you get that. You want more. So all this is being developed in such a way to not only this, that it emits radiation which absorbs here and there, and we should study it, and we should be still careful, but makes also sort of very heavy burden on our psychology. This that people have a burnouts and with whatever effects. And they also this when you say ask for any timeline when we will finally know. 20-something years ago, when European Union was funding first projects on cell phone radiation and health, and while I was part of one of them, this project of Reflex, that was 1999. And then was thought that then was starting also parallelly another epidemiological project called Interphone. It was thought that in 4 or 5 years, when Reflex is ready, when Interphone is ready, we will know everything, or we will be so much more knowledgeable that we will know whether it is any harm or not. Well, believe me, it is 20-something years later. We don't know. We don't know. And problem is not only this, that this research, what has been done so far, is of not sufficiently good quality. Also this, that we are making lots of research that is also listed somewhere in some database, this and this and this, and so many studies have been done. But we have also a problem of this, that it is useless for our purpose of defining whether it is these exposures are harmful to human health or not. Because people, instead of doing experiments on human cells, either human cell lines or primary human cells, they take variety of whatever the animal cell lines and study them, and so and what, without any very much purpose, because not because in our lab is being used this and this cell line, so let's look, because very much research has been done this way, that we have very good model which worked for this or that research in our lab. So what if we use this model for study mobile phone radiation? Without thinking that maybe first we need to think what kind of model would be useful for studying mobile phone radiation effects, so we could say something about humans later. But first of all, we should do studies in humans, but studies in humans are not being done. We are studying weird animals, weird cells. So when funding agencies look at this, they say, why we should spend money on this kind of research when we have more pressing issues with breast cancer or heart disease, with melanoma, and so on and so forth. So why we should spend money on this, which is most likely, and according to those very important guidelines, harmless, spend money on more of this research.
If you don't look, you'll never find.
And if you don't look, then you don't find. And then, of course, then you say, all right, we don't have evidence showing that something is harmful. Well, you don't say then that because we didn't study it, but we just end on this. We don't have
we
evidence.
Don't have it.
Yeah, we don't have evidence. And in case somebody, but how comes? No, we have thousands and thousands of studies and we don't have evidence. Yeah, but still, we don't have evidence because we didn't study, not because we have thousands of studies.
There's always a person in the room that's often standing at the back, and there's the one that says, exercise caution. Yeah, I'm not saying it's left or it's right, but exercise caution. And he or she is most often the one that doesn't get listened to. And it's so frustrating because it makes perfect sense to someone that's balanced and not directly involved. That's the person you want to go to find out the truth of the matter.
Yes, because as I began to ask recently, how it is morally and ethically okay for scientists, knowing that they have large gaps in knowledge, knowing that scientific evidence so far gathered is mostly of very poor scientific quality, use this kind of evidence to claim that everything is fine and safety guidelines protect everybody, no matter status of health, status of age, size, color, whatever.
Yeah.
No matter anything, they are being protected. So people who are not educated in this area and who are not following this field and reading all these studies that are being published, and they don't know how many of shabby studies are published, they would wonder, because it got this kind of, we got such an atmosphere that anything what is published in so-called peer-reviewed journal, that it is scientific truth.
Yeah.
You can't be further from the truth by saying it is not so. It is not so. There is plenty of studies that are published in peer-reviewed, so-called peer-reviewed journals, and that are very poor quality, shabby, that should be rejected, but still they are being published. I'm talking about it. I'm arguing about it. I'm being ostracized because of it. But it is what it is.
Well, we're fortunate that there are people like yourself that do stick the neck out and do question and push for more information. And again, it's just exercising caution. You're not screaming from the rooftops that it should be turned off. You're just exercising caution and saying we need to look deeper.
Yeah, we need better research and more research, and with emphasis on better research. And by better research, I mean targeted research, what we need to know using models that can provide information for the purpose that we need it, not just science for science. Science for science is beautiful, wonderful. I've done it for years. But also we need science for certain purpose. And this should be exercised more.
Is there any country or government that you've worked with or been someone involved with that is better at dealing with this, that is more cautious or more analytical or more willing to look at information from a broad spectrum? Or are they all much the same, as it doesn't really matter if it's America or Russia or anywhere?
Let me say that they are all the same.
Right.
I have right now in press review article where I have reviewed health policies related to electromagnetic hypersensitivity and health policies that are being exercised by such organizations as WHO, ICIR, or FCC, and health policies exercised by different governments of different countries, including European Union or Nordic countries or number of different countries around the world. This issue of existence of electromagnetic hypersensitivity is being acknowledged pretty commonly, that this kind of symptoms are that there are people who claim themselves that they are sensitive and they have certain pattern of symptoms that they complain about them, and that those symptoms can finally trigger such a health or became such a health concern that their life is being affected. Not only health, because they feel those symptoms differently, but also this how they can live in society, how they can live in family, how they can go to work, and so on and so forth. So those people are being recognized as, those symptoms are fine, they are suffering, and sometimes it can be debilitating, this feeling of those symptoms. But at the same time, those symptoms are commonly considered that they are unrelated to electromagnetic radiation. Maybe yes, maybe not. There is no good information about it, no good studies. But at the same time, even though we don't know what is cause of these symptoms, still those people are suffering. And those organizations or governments are acknowledging that they are suffering. But when you ask, what are health policies to sort of help them to be included, to be not outsiders of the society, to somehow try to improve their health by doing something about it? Nothing happens. There are no health policies around the world. So it doesn't matter whether you look at WHO or ICIR or the FCC or ICS or governments of different countries or be it US, be it Australia, be it Soviet Union, be it European Union, whatever you put, nothing's there. There are no health policies that could be protective or taking into consideration protection of those people in some way in society that is going all the time more and more into forcing people to use wireless media. It is something like before, earlier everybody was being forced into use plastic money. You have to have credit card in order to book hotel, rent a car, and so on. Nowadays, it is already common, everybody has it. Yep. But this is also something like everybody has to have this smartphone connection to it because sometimes you can't buy even tickets to some exhibition or something without your cell phone and connecting with cell phone, with smartphone. So meaning, in order to function in nowadays society, one has to have this connection via smartphone, and it is more and more demanded if you need for banking, if you need for communication, if you need for everyday things.
No, you're right.
For everyday, even in shop, instead of this card for frequent shopper in some shops, you have already card on cell phone, and you just scan it and collect your points. What if you like to collect your points, and sometimes get offers on different goodies in sold by shop. So everything is going into this direction, and at the same time we have this population of people which can be between 1 to 10% of human population that will be complaining, whether they are complaining rightly or wrongly. For this we don't have enough evidence, because studies, provocation studies that have been done, or studies that they were asking about those issues, they are unreliable. They are absolutely unreliable when we are considering this, what kind of symptoms those people are complaining about. Those are symptoms that can be caused by simply being afraid of something, being scared of something, being concerned about something. Being concerned about something can give you headache, not only imaginary, but real headache. And headache is one of the symptoms of EHS. So now, when person is complaining about headache, is it EHS or is it headache because was thinking about EHS? So we have this problem, but at the same time, we think that we are forcing everybody, everywhere, to use these smartphones and to be continuously and constantly connected to internet in order to function normally in a society. If you don't have it and you avoid it, then you are isolated more and more. And this, of course, leads to additional psychological problems of being isolated, being unable to function, being concerned, and so on and so forth. So this is something what we are, on one hand, loving technology, that we are all the time connected and so on and so forth, but not thinking how heavy burden on our psyche this technology is having, and how it will be affecting future generations, because future generations are not only affected by when they are using it. Parents affect children, how parents interact with children. What they say, if baby, instead of face of mother and mimics of face of mother, sees all the time in front of mother's face cell phone because mother is nibbling there on Facebook, on other social media, or not all the time, but very frequently. So this baby, instead of seeing this mimics of mommy's face and smile, laugh, whatever loving mimics this face can express, sees there is phone somewhere there, or mother is turning head, instead of looking at this kiddo, is looking at cell phone. And this is everything. One could say that this is affecting mentally those newborn kids, newborn babies, how they will be later acting in this. Of course, they will not turn out crazy. They will, of course, in due time function in this society. But what mental stress it makes on this kind of very developing baby, where this brain is very palpable and can do anything to this brain when it is being developed, and it requires this, that you have face-to-face contact with parents, with other people, and see this excitement and involvement and so on. And there is lack of this, because this, so I don't know how badly it can affect these children when they are later youngsters or teenagers or young adults, and what residual problems there might be in those people stemming from this, that mommy was more looking on cell phone
For sure.
on this baby.
Thank you again so much for your time. Really appreciate all that information. It's been fascinating. So, I feel privileged that I was able to tap into that.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thanks very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. It was a long episode and a lot of information. As I did mention, head to the website bumpinginto.com.au. There is 2 links, at least there will be at least 2 links there about some documentaries that you can watch on YouTube that go much deeper into Wi-Fi and 5G and some of the risks that scientists and surgeons have about it. So make sure you do head over there to support those other documentaries as well. There'll be more information about this episode. There'll be more information about all of the other episodes, which, we make a point of being very broad and vastly different to each other. So there's plenty to find over there if you've got the time to have a look. If you can leave a review, a 5-star review tends to be the only one that counts and helps us move further up the rankings. Otherwise, if you can just share it, that's all that I've really asked for. If you know someone that you think is interested, just please share it. That's really, really all this is about, is just finding its way to people that are going to get value out of it. Thanks again for stopping by, and I will speak to you on the next one.